Hello and welcome back to the Mr. Negron Show. Today we're going to be talking about containment in Asia during the Cold War, as well as discussing what to do as far as exercise is concerned during this time of isolation. Now, if you're like my son, he's a gym rat, and unfortunately for me, he took all my weightlifting equipment yesterday. Now, granted, the bench was probably acting more as a shelf for laundry than it was an exercise bench, but that being said, I need to find out another way to exercise. So for me, I can't run and do cardio like most people. I have back issues, and luckily Santa brought me a rowing machine. But it's important before every time you exercise, especially if you're going to be exercising vigorously, that you stretch. So make sure that you stretch properly. I'm sure in gym class you learn stretches. And then once your warm-up period is over, you can exercise and then warm down and stretch again. So hopefully we're going to go through something like that today, and at the same time I'm going to discuss with you containment in Asia during the Cold War. So let's get at it. So it's important to stretch. I'm sure you don't necessarily need to see me stretch for the next 10-15 minutes, but depending on what you're doing, you just need to make sure you're limber and that you're not going to damage any of your muscles before or while you exercise. All right, so finished stretching, and I'm going to program this today for just 3 kilometers because since I didn't get on this machine at all last week, I don't want to really push it. So we'll go ahead and set that up, and then I can start teaching you about Cold War containment in Asia. My biggest concern is this makes a little bit of noise. Hopefully you'll be able to hear me when we do the lesson here. So. Alright, so let's talk about containment in Asia. Now, the Truman administration believed that things were going pretty well in Europe at the time. They had the Truman Doctrine, greasy turkey, remember that, military aid to greasy turkey. And then they had the Marshall Plan that gave economic aid to Western Europe. Now, there was some hitches. You had the Soviets that blockaded Berlin. And then we had the Berlin airlift, which was successful. But people weren't really paying attention enough to Asia. Now, before World War II, Mao Zedong and the communists were at a revolt with the nationalists in China. Now, during World War II, they kind of combined forces to work against the Japanese to get them out. But after World War II, the Soviets gave aid to Mao, and in 1949, Mao was able to overthrow the nationalist government. Now, this came as a little bit of a surprise to Truman, who, as a result, did not recognize the new Chinese government in the UN. Now, because of that, the Soviet Union will boycott the UN, and when northern forces in Korea invade south, the UN Security Council, along with the United States, will send forces there to repel them. And that's what we call the Korean War. Now, the Korean War lasts for about 3 years, and it's the first example of containment policy that Truman puts in place in Asia. Also in 1950, Truman starts sending military and economic aid to a place called French Indochina. We will know it as Vietnam. And then later on, in 1954, the French will end up pulling out of Vietnam, and Vietnam will be divided up into 2 different areas, North and South Vietnam. Now, there was some controversy during this time. South Vietnam and North Vietnam were supposed to hold general elections to determine who was actually going to rule Vietnam, but figuring that they would lose, South Vietnam suspended those elections. And then the country basically devolved into guerrilla warfare. It won't be till later on in the 60s under the Kennedy administration that we start sending advisors. Then later on with the Tonkin Gulf incident and resolution, where we will contribute and dedicate military forces to defending South Vietnam, which ends up being our Vietnam War. So, when we look at containment policy in Asia, we have two examples, Korea and Vietnam. And then when we look in Europe, we look at the Marshall Plan and the Truman Doctrine. So, for those of you who are trying to figure out what three things we need to do or learn, containment policy, stopping the spread of communism. We have two instances that we can identify easily in Europe, which would be, that's right, the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. And then if we look at Asia, we have two instances that we're all familiar with, the Korean War and the Vietnam War. So, with that being said, I'm going to finish this lesson and continue to row. Hopefully you are exercising at home in some way, shape, or form. Remember to stretch. Tomorrow, I don't know what we're going to do tomorrow. I've got some ripe bananas. Maybe we'll do some banana bread. Alright. Have a great day. Whew. 1 kilometer down. California, teeth, who's my priestess? I'm her priest. Yeah, yeah.